Explosions, nuclear mishaps, and lots of industry. Yes, it's time to talk about another Russian federal subject, and this time we take a look at Chelyabinsk Oblast. Hello, and welcome to 7 Facts. Between Europe and Asia, that's where you'll find the Oblast of Chelyabinsk. On one side, you'll find the mighty Ural Mountains, on the other lies the vast Siberian plain. Cities like Zlatoust or Satka are, geographically speaking, European cities, while others like Chelyabinsk or Troitsk are Asian, and Magnitogorsk is quite literally Eurasian. Chelyabinsk Oblast is larger than Austria, which makes it only a mid-sized federal subject by Russian standards. So, now that we've made acquaintance with this place, let's dig in and find out more. Before this place was a Russian land, Chelyabinsk was mostly inhabited by Bashkir tribes, living under the rule of the Golden Horde, the Nogai Horde, or the Khanate of Kazan. In other words, this was a Turkic province, at least until the 16th century, when the Tsardom of Russia annexed it. Well, actually, this place continued to be dominated by Bashkir culture for another 2 centuries, when Russian fortresses and trading posts began to pop up. Many cities of today can trace back their history to those forts. Around the same time, with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, European settlers really began to flock to this place. This is how, in just 2 centuries, the demographic balance tipped in favor of European ethnics, with only 10% of the Chelyabinsk folks belonging today to a non-European group. The city of Chelyabinsk is the capital of the oblast and one of the largest cities of Russia. It was founded as the Chelyaba fortress in 1736 on the site of an older Bashkir village. During Soviet times, the city's population exploded as it became a major industrial center, and during World War II, it was the source of about 18,000 Soviet tanks. To this day, Chelyabinsk remains one of the country's main industrial centers, with the addition that it's also an educational center with over a dozen universities. Since we're talking about a city with a population of over 1 million people, of course, this is also a place of culture. Cultural and sports centers, museums and theaters, commercial hubs all dot the city landscape that combines historical architecture with industrial and modernist styles. Chelyabinsk might be classified as an industrial city, but it's definitely a lot more than that. Before we go to the next fact, I'd like to ask you something. This video isn't sponsored, so perhaps you'd consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron. If you still enjoy my content, go visit my Patreon page and help this channel out. Okay, now let's go to fact number 4. If you've ever heard of Chelyabinsk, but don't quite know from where, let me clear things up for you. In 2013, at the dawn of February 15th, Chelyabinsk was visited by an object from outer space. A super bolide meteor descended over the Ural Mountains, traveling at over 55,000 km per hour and exploded at an altitude of 25 km. When it did, the flash was as bright as the sun and generated a shockwave that injured over 1,000 people. The meteor, that was estimated at 17 meters in diameter and a mass of 11,000 metric tons, exploded with a power of about 500 kilotons of TNT. That's 20 to 30 times more energy than was released from the Hiroshima atomic bomb. 6,000 buildings were damaged by the shockwave and debris, but the folks of Chelyabinsk were lucky. Had the meteor exploded at a lower altitude, the damage would have been a lot more substantial. In the 1940s, the oblast became associated with top-secret nuclear research. The research undertaken here looked into the production of weapons-grade uranium and plutonium. For this reason, by the way, Chelyabinsk used to be a closed region where foreigners weren't allowed to enter. Although there are no nuclear power plants in Chelyabinsk, there are some production reactors where spent nuclear fuel is reprocessed. Unfortunately, in 1957, things went horribly wrong at the Mayak nuclear fuel reprocessing plant. Known as the Kyshtym disaster, this was one of the most serious nuclear accidents in human history, only lagging behind Chernobyl and Fukushima. It was also the first man-made radiation emergency. the cooling system of a large tank containing liquid radioactive waste failed, resulting in a massive explosion that ultimately contaminated about 20,000 square kilometers of land. Since this was a top-secret facility that wasn't even marked on maps, we don't really know how many people suffered from radiation poisoning. Officially, there were 10,000 people evacuated, 200 died of cancer and 66 of chronic radiation syndrome. But of course, those numbers could be much higher. Directly related to the previous fact is the former lake Karachay. This place once earned the nickname the most polluted spot on Earth, and for good reason. You see, when nuclear research began in Chelyabinsk, environmental concerns were not taken too seriously. The Mayak facility where the explosion occurred was dumping contaminated water directly into a nearby lake, Kazan. When the lake quickly became radioactive, they switched to Karachay to keep the contamination away. But this turned the lake quite literally into the most polluted place on Earth. Let me explain. It was estimated that the sediment of the lake bed was composed almost entirely of high-level radioactive waste deposits to a depth of roughly 3.4 meters. The radiation levels in and around the lake could give you a lethal dose in less than an hour. In 1957, the authorities stopped this madness for fear of international attention, but this didn't solve the problem. In the 1960s, the lake began to dry out, which caused radioactive dust to be carried away by winds, irradiating 500,000 people. So, finally, starting from 1978, concrete blocks were set in the lake bed to prevent this from happening. And it was only in 2016 that the former lake was completely filled, locking the radioactive material underground. Still, I wouldn't recommend camping there anytime soon. While Chelyabinsk is doing great economically thanks to its many industrial facilities, the same cannot be said about its environment. So many factories of all sorts concentrated in a single province could not but affect its ecology. So, when it comes to pollution standards, the situation in Chelyabinsk remains one of the most dire. The Oblast is the national leader in emissions of solid substances into the air and is the region with the second highest emission of carbon monoxide. Various NGOs rank Chelyabinsk as the most polluted federal subject out of all 83. Add to this the traces of radiation contamination in various regions and you get one hell of a cocktail. The problem is this. Many, if not most, of Chelyabinsk's industrial facilities are pollutants by nature, and not much can be done about that. So the only way to properly clean up the oblast is to close the factories. But that would condemn the people to unemployment, poverty, mass emigration, and even more health problems. So, as of right now, there's really not much that can be done for Chelyabinsk. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Leave your comments downstairs and don't forget there's a Patreon page where you can support this channel. I hope to see you next time. Bye.